It's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show, live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State. And we have the crucial conversations that Erie needs. Today is going to be, I think, an invigorating conversation as we welcome back Dr. Robert Garland, the Roy D. and Margaret B. Wooster Emeritus Professor of the Classics at Colgate University. He's in residency at the Jefferson Educational Society this week, and the residency is called Democracy from Beginning to Now. And I couldn't even wait for the mics to get turned on, Doc. We had to start talking, you know.
We did, and I'm fascinated to be back with you, Joel. It's great to be here. And I'm delighted as, well, I do have dual citizenship, but as you may be able to tell from my accent, I was not born in this country, but here I am talking about democracy, celebrating 250 years of revolution from the monarch of Great Britain. So I'm glad, very glad to be
So
here.
the PR folks at the Jefferson, they're like they're finding all the connections. So the big Odyssey film with the Matt Damon and Anne Hathaway is coming out.
Yes.
Okay, bring me in on that too.
Well, I couldn't be more delighted that Christopher Nolan is bringing out this film, and the attention that it's receiving is, I think, a testimony to the enduring importance, relevance of a poem that was written 750 years BCE or something around that date.
Wow.
And that's pretty extraordinary. And I think it will generate a great deal of interest, not just in the Odyssey itself and in Homer, but indeed in ancient Greece. So I take my hat off to him. I'm absolutely delighted that he's doing this on behalf of the ancient world.
Okay, so maybe let's start back to those societies. You mentioned that, you know, you've got the Greeks and the Romans. Some of us didn't get a whole lot of background in school. And so what was the rise of the Greek culture to be kind of a dominant
force? Well, it's very interesting because in the Mycenaean Bronze Age world that preceded the world of ancient Greece, as we study it through Homer and Plato and the great tragedians and so forth, that world disintegrated. It seems to be because of the Trojan War. The Trojan War was fought by the Mycenaean Greeks. We assume that it did take place, and it was victorious on the side of the Mycenaeans, but after that, Mycenaean civilization plunged, and Greece entered a dark age. It begins to emerge round about 750, round about the time that Homer is probably composing, and from then on, all the arts begin to flourish again: pottery, sculpture, and writing, which of course begins with the adoption of the Phoenician alphabet by the Greeks.
Wow.
And that also takes place about the time of Homer. Whether Homer was literate, whether he could write, is an open question. But from then on, we get this wonderful surgence of literature in so many forms, in all the all the literary forms that we know today, which is to say, you know, history and writing of plays and philosophy, etc., etc.
Are the Greeks the founders of Western civilization?
You know, that is a hugely controversial subject. You put Western in front.
I did,
because some people would say that, you know, civilization obviously is something that can be dated back to ancient India, ancient China as well. And then what about Egypt? Egyptian civilization was at its peak, really, around about 2000 BCE, which is long before the Greeks appear on the scene. But I know I'm a bit prejudiced because I have given my life to studying the Greeks. I do feel they did something which had not been done before. Now, we could spend the next hour or even 24 hours talking about what is civilization.
Right.
But I do think that Greek civilization did reach a high point that hadn't been experienced before in human history.
Well, I would think it is narrative. It's a gathering narrative. It is, like you say, the arts. It is language.
Yes, it is. It's all those things. And it is so...
And it's got to be values too, Doc.
Of course it's values, yes. We cannot escape its influence. And I only say to that, thank goodness, because it has taught us a lot. And pretty well, I always think this, just about every thought that can occur inside the head of a human being had been thought by the Greeks in the 5th century BCE.
Yeah.
They were just very free-thinking people. They were very religious people, of course, but that didn't prevent them from challenging every conceivable sort of accepted idea. I always like something that Protagoras said. He was a sophist, a person who earned money by teaching, and he said, "Concerning the gods, I neither know whether they exist nor whether they don't exist. The subject is too complicated and life is too short." and that seems to me to put things very much on ground level.
Yeah. What was quality of life for
Quality of
Greek?
life was very, very low. But one has to take into account this fact. When, for instance, the Athenians make money and become a wealthier society, they don't say, okay, I want to have a fast car or the equivalent and live in a fancy home or the equivalent. What they do is they devote those funds to the building of the Acropolis or the Parthenon and things like that, to civic projects and to communal projects like building up a very powerful fleet. So there's something very, very strange from our point of view about the Athenians, and to the extent that we can tell about other Greeks as well, that they had this sense of civic identity, community spirit. And that is something that is not perhaps quite so strong today.
It's interesting, and again, so many of us, are informed by Scripture, the Holy Bible, and it's interesting to read in. Okay, fast forward to the 1st century A.D. or in the Common Era. Quotes. And connections to Greek thought. Paul goes to Athens.
He does, exactly. And he also goes to Ephesus, which is another Greek city which has been Romanized. But, it's thanks to Alexander the Great that it became possible to travel the way that Paul did do, taking his huge siege voyages and so forth. The world was a whole lot safer in the 1st century when Paul was traveling than it ever had been before, and that's thanks to the Romans. And the Greek language was spoken everywhere. It was the lingua franca. It was the equivalent of English today.
That's remarkable.
Yes.
Tell us how the Romans kind of get impacted, because again, limited understanding.
Yes.
We see that the Romans had a Senate, and they were attempting to have democracy. Of course, you read Julius Caesar and it goes south on him.
Well, Rome was founded as a monarchy by Romulus, the man who gives his name to Rome, of course, and we are told, and this is sort of a little bit mythological, but not necessarily completely false, that there were 7 kings of Rome. And the final king, Tarquin the Proud, was such an unpleasant character, and his son as well, that the Romans decided enough is enough. And they exiled him, and they established what we call the Republic, the Res Publica, which you just mentioned, which means basically the Commonwealth. That's the best kind of translation for it.
And where'd they come up with that concept, do you think?
Well, I think it is, it's a sort of democratic idea that instead of having one man at the top who's calling all the shots, we're now going to collectively band together and make decisions as the SPQR, Senatus Populus Quae Romanus, the Senate and the Roman people.
But these would be the aristocracy in Rome. I mean, let's be clear.
Yes, absolutely, we should be clear. So when Rome becomes a republic in about 510 or so BCE, it nonetheless establishes a system of government where the wealthy, the aristocrats, have access to political office. And let me just add a little aside there, and so it has been with all democracies throughout history.
That they start with the aristocracy.
Well, they start with the aristocracy, either those who are from the highest class in terms of birth, or those who are very wealthy.
Yeah.
And of course, in our own society, under our own democratic system, it's not very easy for somebody who is poor to end up president of the United States.
Heck, it's difficult to run for Congress
Exactly.
without having incredible
Exactly.
amounts of
yes.
money.
And that was certainly, as you point out, true of ancient Rome as well when it established the Republic.
All right, so okay, let's say I'm floating around 200 BC.
Yes.
If I'm a learned person, am I aware of both cultures, Greece and Rome, and what do I know about them both?
Yes, you are, because Greece enters into Rome's orbit. You take the date 200, that's about it, when Rome starts to expand into the Mediterranean. And eventually it will completely overwhelm Greece and extend itself even beyond the Greek perimeters that were established by Alexander the Great. And that is something that was very much in the Roman mindset, because they were very aware that Greek culture was older than theirs, and that the Greeks had achieved things which they, an up-and-coming infantile culture by comparison, had not yet done. So there was this sort of odd kind of inverted snobbery relationship between the Greeks and the Romans. They both admired Greek culture, but they also looked down on the Greeks because they were much more successful militarily. So they had this sort of, I like to think of it as a sort of a marriage between a husband and a wife who have known each other for a long time, and they've got gripes against one another, and yet they also ultimately respect one another as well.
So we have what, Plato and Aristotle on the Greek side, right?
Yes, yes.
Do we have any major thinkers on the Roman side?
Well, we do, but we have to say that it's a lovely statement. The contribution of the Greeks to philosophy was philosophy. They invented it.
Okay.
And the Romans are always characterized as a very practically minded people. The Greeks, by comparison, are very intellectually minded people. And that is, to a large extent, it's true. The Romans were incredible in terms of their technological achievements, aqueducts, bridges, etc. That was not the Greek style whatsoever. But that's not to say that the Romans did not have thinkers, but they were not originators in the same way that, say, Socrates was, or Plato or Aristotle. But Cicero, for instance, who was a very important politician, he was, we might call him something of a synthesist.
Okay.
But there were plenty of highly intelligent thinking Romans, but none who really invented a new philosophical system in the way that the Greeks had done.
I'm getting at something here, and I want to ask one more question before we go to break. Where do you think that the origin of respect for your fellow man comes in? I'm respect for life. I mean, I know, again, as a religious person, I get what Moses taught, what Jesus taught, and so on.
Yes.
But I'd love to see, where do you see that in the Greek and Roman
Well,
culture?
I would say it goes back to Greece. It goes back to Athens deciding that everyone who was a citizen was equal to every other citizen.
Wow.
And
who, that was Aristotle?
No, that goes way back
Way
before
back.
Aristotle. We can trace the origins of Greek democracy, I think, back to Homer, because we see that assemblies are being held in Homer, and that's taking us back to 700 BC, say.
Wow.
But the real moment when democracy becomes implemented in an extreme form is by Athens sometime around the beginning of the 6th century BCE, around 500, in other words.
Because you have to have respect for life to say, yeah, you deserve a vote.
Yes, and whatever your background is, whether you're a nobleman and an aristocrat, and whether you've been educated and all the rest of it, you are equal to the lowest of the low who has the right to stand up in the assembly. The Greeks have this, the Athenians have this wonderful phrase, hobolumos. Anyone who wants can get up in the assembly and say, I've got a thought on this subject, listen to me. Now, that is an incredible, momentous moment in human history.
Dr. Robert Garland's our guest here. He is in residence at the Jefferson tonight at 6 o'clock, talking about this Athenian democracy, successes and failures, out at the Harbor Creek Municipal Building. Stay with us. It's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. I better, for the purposes of making sure people who want to dive in on the rest of your residency, let me go through these dates here. Tonight, again, in Harbor Creek, Athenian Democracy, Successes and Failures, 6 o'clock at the Municipal Building on Buffalo Road. Tomorrow at ECAT, the Erie Center for Arts and Technology, you're speaking at 6 o'clock about the broken chain. We'll get into that in a second. And then on Friday morning or Friday afternoon at noon at the Jefferson, Where's Democracy Now? Is that a lunch deal that you can sign up on their website? It's $5 for the lunch, but you don't have to eat the lunch if you don't want to. Just come see Dr. Garland here. All right. Where were we? We were kind of talking about the kind of that mixture of Rome and Greece, and let's roll up. You kind of mentioned the Athenian experiment. What were some? I don't want you to give away the story what you're talking about tonight, but what are some of those successes and failures? Well, why did the Greek democracy kind of fold?
Right. Well, one of the great successes, of course, was the extraordinary building program that has produced the Parthenon, the Propylaea, which is the entrance gateway, the Erechtheum, which is another beautiful temple, and then we have the flourishing of all the arts. Painting, vase painting is all that survived, but I'm sure that there were large-scale paintings as well. And we get the theatre, which becomes absolutely world-class, and we're still performing, of course, plays by the big three, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides to this day. It's also the case that historical writing, Thucydides, takes on a new sort of incentive, becoming much more scientific, really. And philosophy, we must never forget, of course, this is a city where Socrates was born. Yeah. And I can't imagine what it would have been like to be wandering the streets of Athens or in the Agora where people met every day, and you would have said, oh my gosh, there's so-and-so and so-and-so.
Right.
And you would have heard all these people talking among themselves and so forth. So, I mean, that is one of the great successes and the openness of Athenian society. And yet, we have to always remember that it was a slave society. It was a slave population which I think was probably every bit as large as the population of free-born citizens.
Wow.
Let's say 100,000 free-born, 100,000 slaves. And of course, it was a society that did not give women the right to speak in the assembly, or indeed give them the right to appear in a court of law. So there were these two features that have to be balanced against the great achievement of Athenian democracy. Plus, Athens ran an empire. And though that empire began, as empires often do, as a kind of alliance of equals, over the course of time, Athens became more and more repressive, so that it became impossible for states to rebel against Athens.
If this is going to sound goofy, but fast forward to the Articles of Confederation. Our
Right.
first attempt at,
Yes.
at a structured government. It didn't work. Would you say that there's parallels to Athens?
Well, I think that democracy is never created whole at a certain moment. It has to evolve. I absolutely believe that if you try to set the constitution in stone without the ability to have changes and amendments, then it's going to no longer reflect the best interests of the people. It should always be available to organic change and evolution.
Interesting.
And certainly Athens didn't become a democracy overnight. The first steps that we can detect were taken around about 700 BC, but it wasn't until 450 BC that Athens became the full democracy that we talk about today. And of course, the various amendments that were introduced into the American Constitution reflected thoughtfulness and changes and new ideas and so forth. And a living, successful democracy must always be available to change and evolution.
Quickly before the bottom of the hour, is it remarkable to you that you are able to read Homer, that the antiquity lasted through these
Yes.
millennia?
It's extraordinary. And I always remember there was an art historian called Kenneth Clark, and he said on one of his programs on the BBC, to the extent that we are the heirs of the Greeks and the Romans, we got by through the skin of our teeth. Almost all this stuff was lost. And, we have to thank the monks who copied out the
Okay.
manuscripts, and the manuscript hunters who brought back the manuscripts from particularly places like Constantinople, just before Constantinople was burnt by the Ottoman Turks. And if all this stuff had been lost, because, in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, you would have looked around Rome, you would have seen crumbling buildings.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have meant anything to you. It was only because this stuff had survived in monasteries that it then was able to be printed by the Venetians, Aldus Manutius and others, and here we are talking about it today.
Pretty remarkable. Didn't we lose the Alexandrian library?
We did.
Right?
It completely burnt to the ground. Yes.
Unbelievable.
So we've lost an enormous amount of ancient texts. We're just very lucky at what has survived.
Dr. Robert Garland is our guest here. He is at the Jefferson this week, jeserie.org, back after news. Having a fascinating conversation here on the Joel Natale Show, live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio. We're talking to Dr. Robert Garland, one of the foremost experts in the country, maybe in the world, on the classics. He hails from Colgate University, is here at the Jefferson Educational Society. His residency this week, Democracy from Beginning to Now. Let's talk a little bit about Erie. And again, you're back. You've spoken at the Global Summit. You had a residency last year, and you're back this year. What is it about Erie that draws you back?
The people. And the wonderful reception, both from the people who run the JES, the Jefferson Society, and for people who I have now seen. This is my third residency, and who I recognize in the audience and who come up to me afterwards, and I feel it's like speaking not just to an anonymous audience, but to friends.
Yeah.
And I feel so comfortable here. I just love my association with the city and with the Jefferson and the people who come, and it's just, I look forward to this every year.
Is it do you get the kind of reception? Are people fascinated as much as I am about this content? Because again, I feel like you're filling in gaps, Dr. Garland.
Yes. Well, I always feel a sense of, and this is not too strong a word, I think, wonderment that people are still interested in the ancient world. I mean, I know why they should be.
Right.
But look, I've spent my life kind of trying to sift through it, etc. But the fact is that, and I mentioned, of course, the Odyssey film that's coming up. I mean, the interest in that film is not just because it's a blockbuster, but people have heard of the Odyssey, and they may not know the full story of it, but they know enough about it to be fascinated. And that is to the immense credit of the ancient world that lives within us.
Sure.
So at the same time, I do not take it for granted ever that an audience is going to turn up to listen to anything that I've got to say, because after all, it does require a stretch of the imagination to go back 2,000, 2,500 years, whatever it might be, and imagine what it was like living there, and to derive some kind of satisfaction from reading something like the Odyssey that was written all those years ago about such a different society. And yet, there's something universal about it. And I think there's something universal generally about Greek culture.
All right. Well, again, you have this rise of the Athenian democracy. You have, all of these good things going, but then it fails, and there's this broken chain. Can you explain all that?
Well, as far as Athens is concerned, they take what I think is a fatal step, which is they undertake the Peloponnesian War. And they do so at the prompting of a very great statesman, which is to say Pericles, who has given his name to the age, the Periclean age or era. And the first year into the war, a plague breaks out, and it probably takes off between a third and a quarter of the population. Wow. And it's so successful, the plague, because Athens' population has contracted within the walls, because Periclean strategy said, forget about being a military force, just depend on the sea, because Athens had such a powerful navy.
Right.
And as a result of that, the plague breaks out because conditions inside the walls become absolutely injurious to health and so forth. Athens nonetheless continues to fight and recovers and sends out a fatal expedition to Syracuse. They think that it's so easy to conquer Syracuse, warning for all ages, and no, it isn't. And as a result, the whole army is lost. Athens continues and continues until eventually at the end of the Peloponnesian War in 404, Athens is defeated. But democracy is restored after the war, after a short period known as the 30 Tyrants. And as a kind of act of reconciliation, they choose a kind of somebody to be a scapegoat for it all. And who is that scapegoat? One of the most well-known Athenians, Socrates.
Wow.
And so I think that Socrates' trial, because he was associated with anti-democratic sentiment, and many of his friends were aristocrats, etc. He is selected as the scapegoat to be responsible for the fact that, in some sense, Athens lost the war.
Wow.
But democracy survived right up until the time when Alexander the Great conquers basically the entirety of the Greek-speaking world, and then no country can have a foreign policy. So democracy becomes very much a reduced quantity. We talked about Rome. Now, Rome did, in a sense, try to implement democracy, but then what was the problem? Rome became an empire, a vast empire, and you can't have democracy operating when you've got a population of perhaps 63 million,
wow,
with no postal voting and no ways of counting and so forth. Athens could be a democracy because it was a small community by Roman standards. But after that, democracy dies out. So I'm always insistent that we do not derive our democracy from Athens. Athenian democracy, no. It was not the democracy that survived. It was not the democracy that people looked back on when democracy begins to take root again. The first glimmerings of democracy are in the Italian republics, like, for instance, Venice, and more significantly, Florence. Florence had a kind of a council of signoria, and all men who were members of the guilds, which were very powerful and wealthy, were entitled to participate. Excuse me.
What era is that?
We're talking about the 14th, 15th centuries.
AD.
AD.
Okay, so
yes,
we have to go basically 2,000 years almost to get to a revival of,
that's right,
a representative republic.
The one other example is, of course, the Magna Carta of King John.
Sure.
And that's in 1215 when the barons force King John to sign this document, which meant that, for instance, it was mainly about laws, that you could not just simply be imprisoned without a trial. And when a trial took place, you had to be tried by a jury of your peers. And these, of course, have become enshrined in our sense of what a democracy is all about.
So in all of those years, you know, the years of the Crusades, the years of the strength of Muhammad and the Muslim, you know, going into Spain and so on, and
yes.
throughout the Middle East, there's no it's all authoritarian, basically,
with one exception, one might say, Iceland.
Iceland. Okay,
Iceland,
here we go.
Iceland from 930 AD onwards has something called an Althing, and that is an assembly of all the people. And it meets only once a year, I think, as far as we can tell at its beginning. But it persists, and it's now describes itself as the longest-running parliament in history.
Okay.
It was actually suspended in the 19th century for about 50 years, but it's still called the Althing to this very day.
Wow, wow. All right, so that's that broken chain. I want you to fast forward to the North American colonies, right? The 13.
Yes.
And those thinkers, again, a lot of us think, okay, they were you know, rich farmers, thinking that they didn't read much. You know, they were too busy with their farms and maybe with their slaves or whatever.
Right.
But there were thinkers in that group.
Well, and of course
founders.
we have to pay them founding fathers full credit. These were educated men. They were versed in ancient history. They read, for instance, particularly Plutarch's Lives of the Greeks and the Romans. They studied them intensely. And when they came to debate what type of government they should have, whether it should be federalist or to what extent federalism should dominate,
okay,
they referred back to Rome, and they took the name of Publicola, who was the first consul of the Roman state. So they were looking to the Roman model, even though that model, as we have just said, is somewhat flawed in terms of being a full democracy. It couldn't operate as such. But they found inspiration in the ancient world, And of course, we call it the capital. We call it the Senate.
Yeah.
This is not by accident.
Sure.
It's because they are not just paying a deference to the ancient world, to the Roman example, but they are, in some sense, seeking to emulate the Roman world as well.
Do you feel that the empowerment that is kind of innate to the Declaration of Independence of saying, hey, we have a voice to post these grievances
Yes.
against the monarch.
Yes.
Does that point back to kind of the empowerment of the Athenians?
Not really.
No?
Well,
Okay.
there was an incident which occurred in about 511 or so, when the Athenians alleged that two Athenians killed the tyrant, and they say they saw the beginnings of democracy from that date. But as the Thucydides, the historian, points out, in actual fact, they didn't kill the tyrant, they killed his brother, and in actual fact, it led to greater repression. But the Athenians built into their foundation charter the belief that these heroic men got up and they killed the tyrant and then set Athens on the road to freedom. It wasn't true. Often foundation myths are a pack of lies.
So when we think about the desire for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Oh gosh, what? I mean, it's impossible to hear those words without a frog in your throat, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think today.
I'm just
Yes.
trying to understand how they got off. How
Yes.
did these guys get off?
Yes.
Of saying to George,
Yes.
this is what we're going for, and
Yes.
you're not providing it.
Yes. And they would not have gone down this route if George had not pushed them over the edge, which I think is, well, for my country of birth at any rate, one of the great tragedies, so to speak.
Yeah.
But, I mean, one has to give Jefferson, who probably penned those words, full credit for his command of language. And of course, rhetoric. You can't have a democracy. Well, today we just have sound bites, but at any previous period of history, think of the importance of the Gettysburg Address.
Yes.
Think of the importance of the speeches that Churchill gave during the war.
JFK, you know.
JFK and Obama, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, these were men who knew how to talk, and they talked in a manner that was memorable and which was inspirational as well.
Is there anything in your lineage, when you hear the words, we are endowed by a creator with these inalienable rights?
Yes.
Is that a concept that the ancients would have grasped, or is that solely coming from Moses and Jesus and the Judeo-Christian lineage?
Yes, it certainly isn't something that any Greek would have said. The Athenians would have said simply that, I mean, I know this is a document that is crafted for the colonies, but it's stating as a general principle that obtains everywhere in the world. Now, the Athenians would have said, we the Athenians, not we the people, for a start.
Right.
And they would have said, yeah, we are a lot better than the people down the road, the Spartans, the Thebans, and everything else. They could not have imagined associating themselves with other people who were not Athenian born and bred. So this is something new in human history.
That is really the genius of the Declaration.
It is the genius of the Declaration. Of course, it has problems because it doesn't acknowledge women in it, and it talks very pejoratively about the Native Americans.
Yeah. They had to strike anything referring to slavery. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, which was a battle in Philadelphia, like it was a battle in Washington in 1859.
Exactly, the original sin, sort of ingrained in the document. Yes.
We've just got like 5 minutes left. I want to ask what we should be internalizing, what we should be learning from this lineage, because again, America 250 is a moment where we can really wrestle with kind of the genius of our system.
Yes.
It's incomparable, elsewhere, like Dr. Ferrati says, it was the start of a revolution of democracy and of empowerment of the people that started in the 18th century and goes to the 21st and hopefully further. Speak about all that. I know that's a crazy question, but yeah.
Well, can I ever so slightly,
please,
take issue?
Okay. Here we go.
Because although you rightly point to the extraordinary gift of American democracy, but the Bill of Rights of 1689, which was established by the British Parliament, really was a blueprint for how America would establish as well its Bill of Rights. And
is Wilberforce in all that? Is that the era?
That was later.
That was later.
Wilberforce was later.
Okay.
This was at the time when Britain had gone through a period of civil war.
Yeah.
The execution of King Charles I, who was considered a genuine tyrant. He was a genuine tyrant, and he ruled as such, and he introduced taxation. He did many of the things that George was tackled with, but he did it on his own citizens, so to speak. And he was executed in 1649, and as a result, there was a period when there was a government run by Cromwell, which was sort of like a proper parliament, because Charles had not allowed parliament to be called for a whole period of time. So a lot was going on in Britain in the 17th century, which culminated in 1688, when something called the Glorious Revolution took place. The Glorious Revolution was when James II, who was very unpopular, was forced into exile. Wow. But there was no battles and there was no bloodshed, so it's called the Glorious Revolution. And the very next year, Parliament introduces the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is the inspiration for the American equivalent as well.
Wow.
But this is not to deny the uniqueness of what America was doing in 1776. And of course was the inspiration for the French Revolution as well. But we should also acknowledge, I think, the part played by Thomas Paine when he writes the document on common sense, in which he urges the colonies to revolt. And that becomes a very popular document which is circulated and which definitely has an impact on the Founding Fathers. And I think without that, it might not have taken quite the form quite so quickly as it did. It's one of those examples where it's a short pamphlet, really, but nonetheless it grabbed the popular imagination, and people said he's dead right when they're sort of on which side of the fence should we come down, should we be loyalist, should we be revolutionary. It persuaded many people along the course towards revolution.
Pretty remarkable that media had that kind of impact.
It absolutely is. It's your media there actually playing a very major part in the independence that America achieved.
We're in a tough spot, America, right now. Lots of division. Is there something that you, from your perspective, knowing the classics, knowing the history, that that people around this time are not, they're not understanding, or they're not remembering, founding principles, if you will?
And the unity that was established against a lot of opposition. The 13 colonies had great difficulty all signing up, and New York didn't initially, etc. They abstained, yes. Yeah. And there was a lot of pressure, before we, the people, was enshrined into the document. It was always customary to name the states individually in north to south. But no, the pressure at that point, apparently due to a Philadelphian governor, was to say, no, we're not going to name the states. We're going to say we, the people. And those words are so important for us to remember. And of course, when you have a lawsuit here in this country, it is the people versus.
Yeah, right.
In England, throughout the United Kingdom, it is Rex versus.
Yeah, the Crown.
In other words, the Crown versus. And although, look, I'm not going to rubbish my country
right,
by any means, because I do think it's truly a democracy, despite the fact that it's literally or technically a constitutional monarchy. Nonetheless, I acknowledge and honor the difference that the American system has in speaking of the people. We have to remember we are the people. And I think that, your question deserves so much attention. It's so important. It's so relevant at this moment. How do we keep the system that we love and cherish vital and alive? I always think of what Benjamin Franklin said at the convention when he's asked by this woman, well, do we have a monarchy or a republic? And he says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it, preserve it. And we are at a moment of history, and I get very moved, honestly, almost to tears, when I think of how I care for this country and how I have to say, am very anxious for it as well. I think it's very important that we bridge the gap between Democrats and Republicans and MAGA and everybody else and recognize that what we hold is far easier to destroy than to bring back to life.
It's a lot more fragile.
It's a lot more
than
fragile.
we're treating it right now.
Exactly. You know, I have friends who have ended friendships with people on the opposite side of the political divide. I deplore that. We have to go on speaking, communicating, and respecting one another.
Find him throughout the county here, Dr. Robert Garland. We appreciate you taking the time, sir.
Joel, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
It is 5 minutes in front of 5.